What's up, Embody? Today we have Stephen D20 back in the Yours Truly virtual studio. If you've been following along, you'll recognize Stephen from his previous Yours Truly episode, number 64, Finding Meaning Through Faith and Flavor, link in the description, where he told a story of the reality of truth found in color, taste, and smell, and shared of how his love and fascination with incense led him on a mystical journey to begin a religious faith. Stephen reached back out a few weeks later with a short email that read, "Hi, Christian. I've been listening to a bit of Brennan Graham Dempsey, and in particular, your episode dropped today made me think this is a great time to talk to someone about my thinking on emergent Christianity and why it's inevitable, that the world is the way it is. I've talked a little about this with Graham Pardun, and he's enthusiastic. As you know, I come from a sciences background, so it's also compatible with most ideas and knowledge in that realm. It'll be a bit out there and new to folks, as the idea of foundation of sense residing in aromatics was. But it will be mind expanding, and I think it will go well. I didn't think I was a part of the meta-modern, but apparently I am. Everything I used to think I wasn't, as I am, meta, it seems. I'll present a meta-modern Christian epistemology with an attempt to satisfy the physical materialists of the world in a short amount of time, with plenty of time to discuss." He proceeded to send me a 10-bullet point list after reading through I doubt will be discussed in a short amount of time. Nevertheless, the topics listed, I am confident a corner of the internet will be interested in, as Stephen and I spend some time thinking out loud. Some touch on harder sciences, others on traditional apologetics, while others bring into a more meta space be the use of Vervaeke's Philosophia versus philosophy. I'm going to do my best to sound smart today, but I make no promises. In my last conversation with Stephen, he touched on his history of a physicist father and an artist mother, and has found himself complementary of both, influenced by each. If this video is helpful, give it a like. If you want to keep up with the channel, hit the subscribe button. And if you're interested in supporting the channel, consider one of 3 membership tiers. Top tier members gain a voice to help build this little corner of the internet. So check them out. Membership link in the description. I look forward to seeing how deep into the quantum weeds we get, and if we're able to find today as we practice some conversation craft here as we think out loud here on the Yours Truly podcast. So, without any further delay, I give you all the return of Stephen D20. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. Good morning.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Christian. That was
You're welcome.
It sounded more cogent than the way that the thoughts are in my head. So I guess that's,
maybe that'll help. You've got a different venue today. Tell me about where you're
I'm in
at.
my distillery. So I'm a winemaker and a distiller, and so I'm in my distillery today. The 2 stills you see way in the back there look kind of identical. I was making cherry brandy in those yesterday.
Ooh.
So, the town that I'm in has been growing fruit for New York City for 350 years, and so there's a wide variety of fruit, all very close by. And some of them I can use, some I can't. The equipment that I use for grapes for winemaking is compatible with some of the other fruits, and cherries is one of them, so it's great. And a bumper crop this year, which never happens. So it's I got a lot of cherries.
Good. It seems like cherries and grapes would be their size or shape, their texture. Makes sense.
Yep. And the pits are compatible with the equipment as well. We don't split pits, which is a big problem with pit fruit. You want the pits to be in the distillation and the fermentation, but you don't want them split. So there's chemistries in there that you don't want to eat, at least not too much of.
Wow. Well, so backstage you were saying why you think, or you've been a very scientific, obviously chemistry-minded person, and you were thinking that somehow you would find that may be conflicting with your new Christian faith in the Orthodox Church, and yet you haven't found that to be a tension that hasn't been able to be resolved in some way, or not resolved but lived with, I guess. So how has that worked for you?
Yeah, it's worked surprisingly easily. if I think about it, I start to think, well, how does that work? How does that work? But if I don't think about it too much, everything seems to work out okay. And like I came into the church with this sort of flavor aspect and sort of art aspect. I have sort of art and science mix. So I'm really not great at either of them, but it's a powerful combination. So, but the science part was never really an issue. And I can't believe that that's true, because it always seemed as though I had never really contemplated religion because the science was just incompatible with it. So, but in thinking about it more, I've been making this little outline of how it is that this happened, trying to figure out where the compatibility exists. And that's why I emailed you, because I thought it might be very interesting for people, because I know there's a lot of conversations going on now centered on science, and science is materialism, and materialism is incompatible with this little corner's sort of point of view. And I don't think that it is at all. I think we're talking past each other, as always happens, any area of expertise. And I think this little channel is becoming an area of expertise. We're developing our own language, and whenever that happens, it's difficult for people coming from another language to know the definitions and for them to make sense. So it gets harder and harder, as you develop more and more of an expertise in any area. It gets harder and harder to have easy conversations with people outside the area.
That's true, because of jargon and such. And one of the interesting things, though, that you said right at the top of that response was, some people would frown on the idea of like turning off a part of your brain during. You said like I just kind of I try not to just think about the question as much as like maybe embody the present thing that's happening, or I don't want to put that in your mouth necessarily, but it reminded me of a recent conversation I saw with John Vervaeke, when he's talking about, he has this 4 P's of knowing, and that if you're trying to like the questioning, like the propositional, how does this rationally make sense or something like that, like allowing that voice to kind of sit in equal to other parts of our knowing, like being able to go and participate in something without having to think about it, because your body already has like an embodied knowledge of how to participate, and you're like using that. And I think that can obviously lead us into these other types of knowing that are happening at all sorts of levels, from the quantum to the thermodynamic. And so I think
that the propositional, what tends
to
happen with the propositional is we extract time out of things, and we live in a universe where we're embedded in time. We're embedded in a flow, and the flow state. Vervaeke was obviously influential on me as well. I think I watched all of that Meaning series, all 50 episodes. Right? I found that really interesting. But yeah, I think that the propositional knowledge is just is taking snapshots and saying we know what the movie is because we have these 16 snapshots. It's like, but you don't know what the movie is. The movie, the flowing nature of the time is absolutely important to the understanding of it. So. And that's, I think, one of the ways that helps me think about that is the way that I think about flavor. I mean, we don't know, you conjure up the taste of broccoli. Where does it exist? How does it exist? And yet it's always there in exactly the right spot when you taste broccoli, right? So it's kind of an interesting thing. You can't extract it and make a proposition about it. It doesn't make any sense as a proposition. So.
Talking about that flow of time in movie, it made me think of Christopher Nolan, because his films deal so much with those two ideas as a film, which is kind of like a meta part of that conversation. The movie Memento is an early one where that's shot back from the end of the movie going forwards, and the guy has like amnesia. It's very trippy, and then he's got other movies about time travel. But yeah, anyways, that was just something side note.
It is a big problem in physics, in theoretical physics, that time causes all sorts of troubles, and if we could somehow just not think about it so much, a lot of things will, tend to resolve. So,
and we didn't before watches think about it as much, and calendars.
Probably not. We lived in that flow state, and we didn't divide things up, and we weren't as much trying to make our own points because we were living in a world that had points that were developed over 1,000 years, and no one was thinking that the points that you develop off the spot are going to have anything but, maybe some modification of it. It's not like they're going to exist in their own realm. Your points have to get embedded into that history of the development of the idea. So,
well, where do you want to get started on this list?
Well, I mean, we might as well. So I have this list, and I'm not a physicist, right? So, and like as I said, I'm not really a great scientist. My wife is a great scientist, but I'm way too artistic to be a good scientist. I mean, I make too many leaps where leaps shouldn't be made. So there's going to be leaps in here that should be questioned. I mean, all over the place. So,
that's your Terrence Howard disclaimer, isn't it?
Yeah, this is my disclaimer. But I probably know more than I probably know quite a bit about this stuff. But this is just my own sort of trying to figure out how this all worked out for me so well. And like I said, it's only in retrospect, going back, trying to think about how would I say what happened in words. This is me kind of trying to do that, and I'm trying to fit into both of my worlds. And I'm not a theologian. I better say that too. And I'm very, very fortunate because the priest in my parish, on a couple of occasions, I've given him theories, and I said, if I'm being heretic, please tell me. And he's always said, you're not important enough to be heretic. You can think freely. So do not worry about it. It's not like you're teaching people this. Of course, and this is not me trying to teach. It's just me trying to say, here's some interesting ideas. Maybe you will find them interesting and you can incorporate them into what you're doing. But don't take this, and I don't think anybody would, but I'm not trying to present this as a kind of a truth. I'm trying to present this as a journey, as a way that I thought about it, and the idea that there must be other people that could take pieces of this and say, well, that's an interesting point of view. I hadn't thought of it that way, and help you out.
Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. That's all we're doing.
That's it. Exactly.
Yeah. So let's do it.
So, okay. So the first bullet point I have here is the universe appears fundamentally probabilistic. So it's quantum, right? We've kind of had this idea that 100 years ago or something, Einstein figured out that we live in actually the universe is a quantum universe, and it's it runs on probabilities. And Einstein actually had a lot of problems with that, right? He didn't want to think of the universe as being based on probabilities, and he worked a lot towards the end of his life in trying to figure out how it wasn't that way. But more than ever, it's kind of a striking thing that it's very hard to shoot down anything in the quantum mechanics that Einstein came up with. And it's just this probabilistic thing. There's a chance that things might happen in a certain way, and that chance nature makes them happen. And that, of course, is very antithetical to a religious point of view. And I think why in the last 100 years it's been very easy to say, well, religion can't be right because it's positing that things are happening for reasons, and we all know that the quantum world, the reasons that are there, we don't know. It appears to be simply a probability diagram. So it's unknowable, right? We can't know which way the thing is going to happen. It's probability, so we have an idea. Well, it's more likely to be this than that, but we don't know which way it's ultimately you're going to go. Every now and then you roll the dice and 3 6s come up, and you think, oh, that's kind of unusual. Well, yeah. So
that makes
and there's no arrow of time in a quantum universe. The time has no meaning. Everything works backwards as well as forwards, and it's kind of disconcerting because we live in time in a way that that seems like just a fundamental thing. How could this not be something that has a teleology, right? That we're moving from one place to another, but the quantum world doesn't see that, doesn't behave in that way.
It's interesting because culturally, the quantum has been introduced by Disney's Marvel movies through the comic books. Right. So there's like a popular mimetic idea about this out there now that gives a little bit of, I mean, it's obviously fictional. It's not like totally based on, but it gives like, there's some mimetic power to it.
Right.
So, I mean, that's kind of a part of the frame when you're talking about these things. I mean, that's going through my mind.
Yeah. And I don't know how these are landing. You know, I probably think about these things differently than most people that are listening to them. So it's that idea that we're kind of across. But I think that there's enough here. I wouldn't be asking to do this if I didn't think that this wasn't something that people could get something out of. But it's you know, it can lead to nihilism, right? If you think, well, it's just a probabilistic universe, nobody's in charge of it, and the scientists have been saying this for 100 years, and the more they test it, the more they realize it's exactly right. It's not that we're discovering a way out of this this trap of no directedness to the universe, but it seems like it gets deeper and deeper. But then the other side of it is that before the quantum world, there was the thermodynamic world. And in the thermodynamic world, you know, an apple falls out of a tree and lands on the ground, and there's a extremely strong arrow of time, right? And so it's hard to sort of figure out, like Newtonian physics, and it seems to be completely at odds with quantum physics. And this has been a huge problem in physics for over 100 years now. There doesn't seem to be any way to join the two things, you know, and if you hear about this idea of trying to do a quantization of gravity to bring gravity and get this ultimate theory of the world where gravity has been brought into the other forces of nature, that hasn't been going well. That's one way of solving this problem of an interface between the quantum world and the thermodynamic world. But the thermodynamic world has a very strong arrow of time. But it only works on larger scales, and the quantum world only seems to work on small scales. Once things get big, things don't go quantum anymore. They go in this thermodynamic process. So we have these two ways of understanding the universe that are both correct. They're both right. One works at a very small scale, one works at a very large scale. So now it's almost like it's even worse, right? So not only is the fundamental aspect of the universe probabilistic, but then there's this other way that it appears to us to not be probabilistic in a very strong way, and it's right too. and when you say, well, what is it that's joining these two things? They don't really know, and they haven't found any. Well, there is one way which I'm going to present here, but there doesn't seem to be any way of solving that problem in a way that sits well with you. Right, that would say, oh, that has the ring of truth, right? That makes sense.
It's interesting though that this is even, you know, a theological issue with determinism and non-determinism, or you know, like that it has mapped onto understandings of Scripture. And I would say something like the hyper-rational looks at it as a deterministic point, and then the less or non-rational way of experiencing is through the idea of some type of agency and choice. And these things happen. This is our human experience and our human story as well.
Yeah, the religious point of view, obviously, we think of God as being in charge of things, and we think of us as aligning to that line, to that timeline, and living within that timeline. And so the way that physics presents things is pretty disconcerting. You know, it's so we better keep moving. I'll go to this. So the second is the measurement problem. So we have this idea that light is both a particle and a wave, right? And so from the quantum point of view, it's a wave. And from the thermodynamic point of view, it tends to be a particle. And the quantum theory is bulletproof. I mean, I don't know if it's the strongest predictive theory in all of science, but I believe that is the Schrodinger equation, which is a mathematical equation that defines a wave function, that defines a wave, is always right. And it's always exactly right. It's right to, I don't know, I think they have it up to 20 decimal places. It's very, very, very right. So it appears as though light is in fact a wave. It can be completely and perfectly described by the Schrodinger equation. But then when you do an experiment, right, with a light. You put the light through a slit, and it goes and ends up on a screen, and on the screen it appears as a particle. It's like if you measure the wave function, suddenly the wave function decides that it's not a wave anymore. It's not a series of probabilities. It's no longer quantum, that it's an actual thing. They call it the wave function collapses, and the wave function collapses into a point. And why does this collapse happen? And the only way around it is to introduce what they call hidden variables, is to introduce a whole bunch of stuff into the equations to force it to work. Because that's pretty bad science, right? You're supposed to do, you can posit things, but no one's ever found any of these variables to be real, right? That it can be figured out. So this wave function, which perfectly describes the universe, turns into a point which perfectly describes the experiment every time, right? So, and then, but the two are incompatible. You have to say, well, there's these variables that somehow are introduced, and we don't know how they're introduced, and we're just going to throw them in, and then everything works. The other way to do it, this is one that is, I think, has been popular lately, or unpopular, is this idea of many worlds. It's that actually the wave function is saying, well, there's a probability of these things happening, and when you measure it, you force the universe to divide up into pieces where each of those probabilities exist. Right, so really weird. So this light going through this slit could end up in this part of the paper, this part of the paper, this part of the paper. The probability of the first part is X, the probability of the second part is Y, the probability of the third part is Z. And all of those universes then exist. And you are on whichever timeline, whichever universe. And those universes have no way of interacting. So there's no way for you to say, well, the Christian Baxter that's in the universe where the light, where the particle of light ends up here, he obviously exists, and he thinks the particle ended up there, but I think the particle ended up where I saw it, and so we're into. So that's how you solve for the idea of throwing hidden variables in, is that you say that they all happen, right? That all of these things happen. It's called many worlds, and so I'm sure there's science fiction on that. There must
multiverse.
Yeah, multiverse.
And so, to that point, that idea is to make the leap that isn't made through an equation to go from wave to particle. Is just right. There was something in there.
All the probabilities are happening.
Yes,
it's hard. It's very hard, because then you start to imagine, well, how many universes are there? It's close to infinite.
Do you think that was birthed out of like a narrative reason or a scientific reason?
I don't think so. I hope not. That was one thing that was discussed the other day, and I came in the middle of a conversation. I probably said something stupid because I didn't realize the beginning of the conversation. But science should not really be a narrative. Science should be a model. Right? It's a model, and you can think of a model as a story, but from a scientific point of view, the scientists know the model is wrong. They don't know how it's wrong. That doesn't seem like a very good story. It doesn't have any resolution or ending. So I think when you hear science presented as a story, sort of like I'm doing now, right? It's bad science, right? You shouldn't do science this way. And I'm not doing science, right?
No, that's how we can. That's one way.
And that's the problem, is that we think that the scientists are telling us a story, but they're not. They might be trying to get a grant to build a machine to test their theory. And in doing the grant, they had to write a little story to other people that know, well, they wrote a little story, but we all know how much of this isn't true. But then when somebody that's outside of the jargon, that's outside of that linguistic realm gets that, they say, oh, look, the scientist has developed a story that's just another narrative. They're not really doing science. They're doing world building, and I think that, I think there's a big difference. Although there's a very good point to be made that peer review is not what we think it is, and that there's an hierarchy there, and that there's all these human problems that are in the peer review in science, and that things become narrative because because of egos involved in the peer review, and then you want to build your big machine because that's gonna, we build machines, and so it all it's sort of like the quantum world all gets thermodynamic. It's kind of the
There
same
you go.
way.
Yeah,
So
it's like
hopefully scientists are realizing that they don't know. They don't know. We say, well, there was a Big Bang. We don't know that. Right? We don't know there was a Big Bang. We know that it looks like this came from this sort of way. And then there's 7 or 8 pretty good theories about what that initial way was. And it's not all, it's not that something is exploding in space and space is exploding, right? The dimensionality of spaces. So it's, I think it's a really bad name for the origin of the idea of the origin of the universe in a Big Bang. It's like, wow, no. So, but
back to the list. We were kind of we were on that super determinism versus maybe relationality or something.
Yeah, so that's where there's this third idea that was realized way back. It was realized when Einstein was still alive. Within a very short time of people postulating there's hidden variables. There just has to be hidden variables. We just don't know what they are. We'll work really hard and we'll figure out the hidden variables. But way back then also there was this idea of superdeterminism, that what we see in the quantum and that particle appearing on the screen is because the wave had information in it that would lead to that particle being there. So the idea that the quantum is probabilistic, it looks to us for all the world like it's probabilistic. But which probability becomes the dot on the screen is known to the wave. Okay, so the wave knows where it's going to end, but we can't know that. And if you think about the ways we think about God,
that's about agency.
Yeah, but if you think about the way we think about God, we can't understand him, right? And yet we can see the result of it. And the result of it looks like a deterministic result. So I think that's one reason why that theory is so unpopular among scientists, because it's pretty much saying God. It's pretty much the idea of God is what's being postulated by superdeterminism. What it also does that probably makes people nervous, it means there's no free will, right? What's going to happen to you is already determined by God, by the knowledge in the wave, the information that's embedded in the wave, knowing where that particle has ended up, which means that, but don't we kind of think that? We think that God is guiding our life?
Help me parse something out right there, because that would be Sam Harris, obvious atheist. He's a determinist that thinks that because of, I guess, some form of entropy, if you could mathematically go all the way forward and all the way back, like that there's a super determinism to that. But his, I guess, is that there's not a purpose to it, that there's not like ultimate purpose to it, where that's.
But what does he mean? I mean, what does he mean? What does he mean by purpose? What is he thinking?
Well, help me go between like the idea of people not liking it because it looks theistic versus.
What I would say is that a scientific point of view, me 3 years ago, me 2 years ago, even 3 years ago, would say, well, it's very elegant, isn't it? I mean, we don't have this problem of infinite number of universes. That doesn't feel very good. We don't have this problem of, well, there's hidden variables and we're just going to ignore it because it turns out we can't figure out those variables. So we're just going to say, well, we'll move on. But in this way, it says, well, if you posit this idea and it's well understood, it's not like it doesn't have any problems to it. The only problem it has to it is that free will is gone, right? As that somehow the universe has a directedness. Now, from a science point of view, you don't know what the directedness is, and you don't know a lot of things, right? So, but I think directly outside of science, when you start thinking about it in your own life or something, you want your free will. You want to think that you can make some deterministic thing, or you don't want it. You have a hard time thinking, if you're an atheist, you have a hard time thinking of this universe as a completely directed thing. And the reason this room exists like this was decided at whatever happened in the very beginning of. So, and it's hard to think, that this wasn't a result of choices. This was a result of, right? So it's almost as like your brain is like, you got all the choices are bad. There's variables, we don't know them, but we know they're there. That's bad. There's infinite number of universes, and that everything that could have happened has happened. It's like, that doesn't feel very well. Or there's this idea that it's super deterministic, and where
so
everything
one would be because of a random cause, and the other would be because of a purposeful cause.
Right.
And so, and there was a really good
looks to us as perfect, we have a way, the way that we think is not the way the universe thinks, right? So we have so it appears to us to have a purpose. And that's how a scientist would get around the idea that God did it, is say, well, it's not really a purpose, but we see it and say, well, this room has a lot of purpose. Obviously the universe had an idea.
That reminds me so much of, I can hear Dawkins saying that, like in my from year, like a decade, I can just hear him, that argument. You have to get rid of the idea that it appears purposeful, but it seems like that we're kind of coming, that in some conversations, even within some hard sciences, that's conversation is shifting.
Yes.
And one of the conversations I heard,
it's shifting right now because they're starting to make measurements on things that are sorting this out a little bit. So
before we get there, I'd be interested.
It's a good time to live if you're trying to parse these things out.
Yeah. There was a Brendan Graham Dempsey conversation he had with a guy named Zach Stein that I watched. And Zach Stein co-authored a book called First Principles and First Values. And in it, he's making kind of like a telos and purpose fundamental ontology argument, like relational, cellular, probably even quantum. I don't know the finer points, but that was what was interesting to me. And he was coming at it from a more, you could say, pseudo-religious, and the guy hadn't been a religious person, but this was like shifting him toward a type of religio idea about how things are. And Brendan was maybe a little less warm towards some of that. And so it was an interesting conversation. And so anyways, that's how I kind of am.
I'm still very warm towards the physics side of it. I don't have any incompatibility, and you'll see why here in a minute. So superdeterminism would apply a fundamentally rational as well inherently relational universe. That's what's so interesting, is that we're seeing, and this sort of stuff you're sort of alluding to here is we're seeing that the universe is sort of like a completely relational thing. It's not that there's things in this universe. There's things that are in relation to each other, and the relation is the primary existence. That the existence is a relational existence. The same sort of thing that we're coming aware of, and why I think a lot of the TLC exists is because all of a sudden we're like, oh, this is entirely relational. Well, the physicists are kind of coming to this conclusion at the same time. And I think some of it has to do with quantum entanglement. You've heard of like quantum entanglement, and I'm not going there, but quantum entanglement will also lead you to believe that there's a relationality, and the relationality in the quantum entanglement. One idea in physics right now is that actually causes the dimensionality of the universe to exist at all. That the universe exists because of quantum entanglement. But I'm just saying that just to, right. So, so the relationality, apparently runs very, very deep. That maybe at its core, the universe is a relational thing, and that would go with the superdeterminism. Because if you have a superdeterministic idea, then for one thing to follow another, they have to be related to each other. And that's the thing that's disconcerting about the quantum, is the quantum doesn't do that. The quantum doesn't think of time as a useful, or doesn't whether things go one way forward or back, it makes no difference at all. So it's hard to develop a teleology when your basic is quantum, right? But if the superdeterminism is right, then the quantum becomes deterministic along with what we see, which is the thermodynamics. So it joins the thread together.
In my conversation with Jordan Hall, my first one, he took me to the quantum place, and he talked about the state of things and when it existed as something theoretically called quantum foam. And that in that state, that was where the probability or the chance for purpose maybe to develop for purposeful things relationally to begin to
Yes.
exist. That
Yep.
and
That's right.
maybe to your next point about a very low entropy state. How to, I don't know, keep going.
So no, that's right. This idea. See, it turns out that the lowest energy state of the universe is not zero. It's a positive number. So that's kind of interesting to think about, because you're always told that the lowest energy state is you're laying down and sleeping or something. But in the quantum world, the low energy state has energy to it. And it's probabilistic how much energy it has. You never know how much energy it has. So at different times, it can have different. There's always a probability that a very large amount of energy will or particle or wave function, a very energetic part of a wave function will appear, because it's all probabilistic. Well, if it's high enough, you might be able to create a universe from it. Or if it's high enough, you might be able to create a particle from it. And so it's
what's hitting me there is music. Like that's where the pattern and probabilities come together, and the waves, like
right.
That something like a rhythm got established.
Right.
That made that.
Yeah, like the first time someone plays a 5-note major chord on a pipe organ might be a high energy state. It might be a very, very, very improbable, right? Very improbable, but high energy state that creates something. So yeah, you could say something like that. But it's really, really, really interesting, because there is a way. Well, I don't want to get too deep, because I don't want to stay in one thing too long, but just suffice it to say that if this is true, then the quantum world makes sense to a thermodynamic world. And there are things you can do to test to see whether that's true or not by looking at the Hawking radiation coming off of black holes, which might have been something that he talked about that quantum foam. And the only way to really look at that level of, this is a very fine thing. This is existing at, the smallest distances that can exist. That's where the foam exists, 10 to the negative 34 meters. So I'm going to try to figure that out. But that's where that foam exists. But that it can become that thing that appears, right, can then get entangled, so to speak, or can become part of the thermodynamic universe, that there is a teleology to it, that can lead to the other. And there's a really good sort of thought experiment that seems to make a lot of sense in that area. But again, I'll say it one more time, is that superdeterminism is not popular, right? The way it's just elegant. It's just elegant because it provides a solution that's not a near infinite number of universes where we exist doing slightly different things in each one.
I have a theological I kind of already touched on it earlier, but I think the hyper rational view of and reading and theology of Scripture leads to a hyper determinism, which theologically is something along the lines of Calvinism theology. But to your earliest point, and to the points about church tradition, that sometimes things within tradition, other parts that aren't only the hyper rational parts of experience and of life, make other things make sense that aren't only super deterministic in the reading of Scripture. And like that the reformed kind of posture of sola scriptura creates a space between these other things that help hold the tension between a determinism and an irrational choice or something like that. And I don't know if that maps.
And it also allows for the reasoning of man to have no way to really
reconcile.
Know exactly, right?
Yeah.
It leaves space for error, and you have to leave space for error because we're full of error. That's the thing about the science point of view, is that any good scientist know that what he's proposing is wrong, and if you think the only reason he's proposing it to make you think it's right is if he's doing scientism, and that's awful. He's trying to build a machine that needs money.
Who are you, just the scientist? Are you talking
No,
about?
no. I'm not talking about anybody. I'm going back to the abstract because it bothers me so much when people are hard on the scientists. But but the scientists are probably behaving badly too. So I can take both sides of it. Both sides of it.
So the next.
So yeah.
To get to the fractal, highly complex states that are highly relational are fractal states. The universe has a fractal structure.
Well, we have to do the one before it first.
Oh, did I miss that one? Oh, I thought we kind of hit that.
Yeah. So the complexity of the universe is near a maximum between a low entropy initial state, low entropy final state. But the maximal state is the state that would be required for our development. So this is a anthrocentric, or I think they call it anthrocentric idea, is that why is it that the universe seems to exist in exactly the sort of way that would allow us to exist? It's a curious question, because when you start thinking of from a scientific point of view, of all the different ways that the universe could exist, that it exists in the way where we're possible. And there's very few, very, 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 very few possibilities of how the universe is set up with initial conditions to where we could exist, right? And one of the things you need is complexity. We're very complex, so you need a universe that can support complexity. And when and the universe that we're in appears to begin as a very orderly state, very high energy, not much, very orderly state, and then it kind of, the Big Bang, I guess there's not a better way to say it, it becomes more complex, right? But then as it diffuses out, and as the universe diffuses and becomes more, and everything separates from each other, right? All the galaxies now are separating from each other. In the future, we won't be able to see any other galaxies because they'll be too far apart. So, but when that happens, you start to get back to an orderly state, because you get to a more evenly dispersed state as this thing expands. It begins in a fairly orderly state, then it expands into this very disorderly state of galaxies and all sorts of things going on. But as time goes by, it heads back to a diffuse orderly state. So
that's what I was thinking. I was thinking about,
very concentrated but orderly. Yeah. You end up with a very diffuse but orderly. The universe's heat death. I'm sure that's talked about in science fiction, right?
Sure.
We're headed towards heat death. Well, it's 10 to the 100 years away, so you don't have to worry about it too much.
But that is the idea of like a spray of perfume out of a perfume bottle, that then there's all the concentration of the molecules, and then it somewhat equally disperses until.
Yeah, and what's weird about the universe is that the dispersion is at a point where we can smell it perfectly. It's not too strong that it overloads us, and it's not too. So
shout out. I need to make a shout out to my father-in-law as we were studying anatomy and physiology. That was his description of diffusion, was a perfume.
Oh, really? Yeah. No, it's good. It's good. I mean, for me, it's really good, right? Because I'm completely oriented that way. So yeah. So why is it that the perfume spray is in the perfect configuration that we can make sense of it? Yeah. So that's a problem in physics, is that we just can't figure out why is it starts to look like this directedness idea. And of course, physicists don't want to say that, because we know that we don't know. So we have to continue on trying to figure out, closer and closer. We can't say, well, it's God, and then we'll be done with it. We have to try to do better than that. So, but yeah, that's an important point. And then the next point is the highly complex states. So we're in a highly complex universe, and we are a highly complex state. And the only way for complexity to increase the way that it has with us is for us to be in a complex state that could lead to further complexity. And I had a
question on that, which was, what's the difference between scale and a fractal? Like a fractal reality versus scale.
Oh yeah. Well, let me. Yeah. There's a piece missing in the way you're thinking about it, and I'll get there real quick. So I will answer that question soon. So they're highly relational, right? A complex state is very relational. But it presents to the mind of man. Now, I don't think this was in your the one I sent you, because I went back and I cleaned it up. It presents to the mind of man as fractal states. So whether or not these are really, if you took to a scientist, the scientist would say, well, what are you talking about? That's a mathematical thing, and that doesn't have anything to do with the universe. And but what I would say is that the way that we think of the universe, it appears as though we're trying to make sense of it. And one of the ways that we can make sense of this thing that's so hugely complex with our limited complexity is to kind of break it down, right? Is to kind of be propositional and create fractal states. Maybe it's an infinite number of fractal states, but we kind of group them together because we're limited in how well we can think about it. I think that works really well with the idea that the way that Pageau talks about it too, is that the fractal states are not, it's not determined. It's just they appear this way. There's a town, there's a city, there's a country, there's, the way that he lays that out. I think it's really good because it's the way that we think of the universe. So it's not that the universe is fractal in a mathematical way. I don't think anyone's thinking that, but that's not the way like Pageau would be saying fractal. That's probably not the way we should be talking about, we're in a fractal. We're in a fractal in the way that we perceive it, the way that we try to rationalize it, right? But the crazy thing about it is that our rationality can rationalize it, and so there's like a rationality built into the universe such that our other rationality, it puts this fractal state on it that makes sense. Right, that is good enough, right? That we aren't missing too many things. That can appear as though the complex state is knowable because the complex state has a fractal pattern. But it's not. I don't think, and I don't want to speak for, but I don't think most people are thinking that's fractal the way those mathematical. You see those pictures that they make, and you zoom in, and it's the same and the same and the same.
His tagline is like symbolism happens. Like you're going to recognize pattern. You're going to recognize that
fractalization happens because of your cognitive prowess is not high enough to discern the actual state, but it is good enough to make it appear as though it's a fractal.
And we find meaning in
right?
a lot
it's good enough.
And maybe sometimes
and the meaning works. And the meaning works. So it's like we know that it's like then this idea of like we're a microcosm, like it seems like we're like this little microcosm of the universe. The universe has this certain sort of property. We view it at a much coarser level, right? We're not as fine-grained. We don't have the mind of God, right? But the coarse way that we look at it works really well, right? It works really well. So it's so that's how I'm using the term fractal. It's as a human thing. It's a human rationality thing. Probably works for. I don't know if it works for any other creature. Who knows, right? But it works. I think it works well for us. So this is another place where I'm kind of going. I probably am going farther than typical, but I'm in Jonathan Pageau territory. So that's a little. It's a little diffuse, but I agree with him. When I was first listening to him, I was like, yeah, this is how human cognition is. We can't perceive of everything because we're very limited in how we can think, but we can think in a way that appears to be the way the universe is progressing.
I would say that
yep.
with relating it to maybe something like orthodoxy or steeped church tradition and practice is that, and I had this conversation with Jordan Hall as well, is like I feel like the propositional has outpaced it goes so much further than our ability to actually participate embodied, and yet Alex O'Connor's coming to this point. He had a recent conversation with John Vervaeke in the Unheard podcast when they're talking about ecology of practice and these types of things that they seem actually simple on paper. Journal, meditate, sing, like they're not scientific in that way, and they're not grand narratives. They're embodied practices that are seen as if they're seen as religious, they may be seen as hokey or low fidelity compared to the grand propositions of physics and biological history or something like that. And so,
Right.
but we've come, that's part of the problem though, is that kind of uh, uh, looking down upon those things because the proposition seems so vast and related to something like technology and science. And
Yeah. I think you have to have a lot of sympathy for someone that's trying to come to the relational from the propositional, from a method that insists that propositional is the only way that you can approach it. So that's a scientist,
Yep.
So you have to have a little bit of sympathy for someone that's never going to see the relational the way a poet does. Right?
That's
So
great.
that's my practice my whole life has probably been, other than the aroma thing, but that's not a practice really. But I've been writing poetry all my life, and I'm more now more than ever, like a poem every other day now. It's crazy.
Yeah, I know. My emails started getting filled up with them for.
Oh, well, you finally had to say Stephen, please, which eventually everybody does. But yeah, so but it's it's not a bad thing to have people starting with the propositional, insisting on the propositional being the basis of the relational, because then when they come to the idea that they have the relational, right, we can all come to a campfire and tell our different stories, and you don't want all the stories to be the same, and you want the stranger there, and so think of the scientist as the stranger to relationality. But as we were saying here, that's all changing because the relationality is.
I have to make this point because Alex O'Connor's. Are you aware of the young man Alex O'Connor on YouTube?
Yeah.
So his first YouTube name or handle was Cosmic Skeptic or something like that. And he's looking at things hyper rationally, and he, in this conversation, and even in his recent one with Chris Williamson, he says, my friend Justin Brierley, who's a Christian apologetics, it's like he started with the relational. Something has changed for him.
Yeah.
He's crossed that threshold, and watching it happen in real time is wildly fascinating. And then he quotes this C.S. Lewis poem called The Apologetics Prayer or something like that, where Lewis has to even come out of his own hyper rationality at the end of the day for a better life, for the good life. And I think that there's something.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons I think that orthodoxy came to me when it did was that I was realizing that science was not going to come up with the answer. Like that, it seemed like they were getting further and further away. No, we don't know what's going on, and it looks for all the world like we never will. And we promised if you worked really hard in this endeavor that we would eventually get to a place where we had an understanding of the world. And it appears as though we're never going to get to that understanding from the propositional point of view, and it appears to be a hyper-relational point of view. And at that point, you're thinking, well, it's not really science anymore, right? Or what's going on? Like there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on right now. But it was partly my disillusionment with science's promise, obviously not coming true, or not what was promised was not going to happen. Now, maybe they never promised a time scale, right? That I was extend. But as you get older, you kind of like to, kind of settle it a little bit, and think that you made some kind of progress during your life towards an understanding of things, and not that as things went on, you become less and less sure of what's going on, and that's really disconcerting, right? To live your life, and as you live it, things get more and more unavailable to rationality, or they're more and more difficult to understand, or we know that there's something going on that we just can never know. Now we can know it through a relational aspect, I think, and that's what I've done with religion and with orthodoxy, and it's so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we can keep going down this list here. Are we on like?
Well, we can probably start. We've done a lot here, so we can probably go along pretty good. So this is not the same as fractal states in mathematics. Relationship requires two things having being. So two things have to have being that have a non-thing relationship modifying them. So if you have a universe where there's two identical objects, like completely identical objects, do you have two objects or do you have one? Right? This is kind of a thought problem, right? But the way that we understand it is that two objects have to have some difference. And the difference is the definition of the two objects don't really exist until you have the relationship between the two. One is larger than the other. So the whatever larger is, which is not a thing, right? It's a relationship. It's a relationship that can't exist outside of time. So now you've got this flowing time aspect that's involved in the relationality between two things. So that I'm just setting up that in a duality of related things and a non-dual relational system. So you have a duality of two things that are related to each other, but they're in a non-dual relationship. So there's a third,
like one telos.
Well, I'm not to telos yet, I don't think.
Okay. Well, yeah, but
all I'm doing is saying I'm defining relationality as, well, you have to have at least two things that are different, and the difference, whatever you're defining as the difference, is the relationality, and the relationality is the essential thing. That's the thing that defines them. It's not that the objects define each other. They're only defined. It seems pretty simple, when you do it, but it's really important, because if you believe the universe is at its base relational, right? We're going back to that idea that it's not quantum somehow at the bottom, right? That it has to be, that the superdeterminism would really be the only answer, unless you think that there's infinite number of universes, which I'm basically made my choice not to go with many worlds, even though one of my favorite physicists is many worlds is sort of his thing. But but I think I like the superdeterminism idea. I think it's a really good idea. Do you know who Sabine Hossenfelder is?
I don't think so.
Sabine, Sabine, Sabine Hossenfelder. She's great. You should watch her. She's a physicist that's become very disillusioned with physics, and she's really, really good at explaining stuff like this. And she's great. You'll see. Sabine Hossenfelder. Anyway, so the next point, relationality in our universe has a functionality based upon whether certain combinations of relations can be stabilized by forming what we perceive as fractal structures. So this is me making another little bit of a leap, but this is what we just discussed. The idea that there's a relationality in the universe that has a functionality, that it's rational, it's functional, right? And that the configurations of the universe that progress through time, which you might call the fractal states if it's the ones that we were recognizing, because I'm defining fractal as having our own mental quality attached to it. That those functional states are the ones that propagate. The states that make sense are the ones that lead to states that make sense. And so that's not very clear, isn't it?
Well, I mean, that takes me back to that quantum.
Certain combinations of relationships work, and certain combinations of relationships don't work. Yeah. Right. And we look at it as, or Jonathan Pageau looks at it and says fractal, right? This is a fractal relationship, but it's simply that certain ways of combining humans together in a group work, and certain ways of combining them together in a group don't work. And the ones that work lead to the next set of ones that might work. The ones that don't work fail, and there's no progression, right? So that could happen. Imagine if all of a sudden we decided to live a certain way. Maybe we're doing this. Maybe we're living this. We've decided to do this certain way of living. It's non-functional, this, whatever it is that we sense is really wrong, is because it's a non-functional thing. We don't like non-functionality. It doesn't feel good, right? And so, is this going to lead to a more functional state or isn't? If it does lead to a more functional state, then you might say something like, well, it just appeared to us to be non-functional, but it was functional because now, look, we're on the other side and we're happy, and we're living, So, but you see what I'm saying is that if you get to a non-functional position, the non-functional position doesn't propagate over time. And since we've decided that the universe is propagating over time because there's this superdeterminism and that quantum is not really right, that those propagated states that lead to more propagated states are the ones that are real, or they're the ones that exist through time, and they're the ones that we recognize as having this fractal thing. And I'm picking the word fractal. When I'm saying this, I'm saying, I don't believe you, Steve. I guess it's like you could pick any word, but I'm using the word fractal in the Pageauian sense. I'm saying, I'm repeating this over and over because I'm so afraid someone's going to say, well, it's not like a mathematical fractal. I'm not saying that it's like a mathematical fractal.
Yeah. And that's kind of why I guess I made that, tried to make that distinction between scale and fractal early.
Yeah.
And
then the fractal is a condensation of a certain scale that your brain has the ability to comprehend. And again, what's weird about it is that if we do that, it works. But maybe those fractals are what I'm positing here is those fractals are the functional systems that lead to the next functional system.
And when you were talking about evolution without talking about evolution a few minutes ago, about but that the word unguided, I guess, is the word that is being maybe questioned, in the kind of the dogma, an unguided, natural.
I don't know that any modern biologist is saying that it's very, very guided. It's guided by sexual selection, right? That's the thing that was left out. We think that we're just adapting to our environment, but no, there's this other thing. There's this sexual selection thing, which is not really about the environment. There's something else. There's something more going on there.
Yeah, well, and so that would be a deeper. That's when you say there's something more going on than simply sexual selection, and then we get into this relationality as a piece of this, being that is maybe that is the layer that hasn't been propagated into the culture near as much as these other points,
Right. Well, you can think of it this way. Think of it. You have a better ability to fractalize the world than a bird does.
Yeah.
Right. Or than your ancestors did. And the reason that we have the life that we do and our ancestor didn't is because they didn't have the ability to parse the world the way that we do now. So in an evolving system like that, where you have an evolving way of perceiving the world, then how can you say that selection is this or this or this or this? Because selection is a moving target. That's the problem with the idea of natural selection adapting to the environment, is that, well, the environment's changing and that's well known, but the creature within the environment is changing. It's sort of like the physics problem where we observe the quantum event, and when we observe it, the quantum event collapses into a particle. It's sort of like that. It's one of my arguments about how we can never really know because we're embedded in the experiment. We are in our own experiment. So we're trying to get an objective view of what's going on, but we are inside. It has to be subjective. It has to be relational. We cannot not be relational to the world that we're in because we can't get outside of the world we're in. And we're embedded at every level, right? We're embedded from the smallest level to the largest level.
And that's a piece of the meta conversation, which is that I think there still is a very powerful idea in our culture and our time that the scientist doing the experiment, that the experiment is objectively being done outside of the scientist doing the experiment. Whenever, like your point is like the whole thing together, the relationship is actually a variable and a factor within the experiment. And that I'm sure in science, that's probably being more and more understood and accepted, but in the general world, I would say there's something that's a new or a novel idea.
Yeah. So remember I was talking about how the quantum event is it's characterized by probabilities, right? But the thermodynamic event is it's 100% going to happen this way. So we go from this probability to this non-probabilistic state. And then I lost my train of thought now on that, what I was going to say about that. But it was I forget how it's going. But it doesn't matter. There's a lot of good stuff here. So let's come back.
Yeah, well, let's keep going.
So we are so relationality in our universe has a functionality based upon whether certain combinations of relations can be stabilized by forming what we perceive as fractal structures. So the first time I said it, was like, wow, what's he done? I hope we've come a little farther on that now. So next, the process of our universe evolving a functional, relational, and rational system, which can be understood by the limited capacity of the human mind as fractals, we describe as being good. So what we think of being good is an understandable universe, is a world that appears to be progressing from a less known state to a more known, or from a
chaos to order,
more chaos to order, something like that. But this is a big step because I'm defining good, right? I'm defining good as the process of our universe evolving a functional, relational, and rational system, which can be understood by the limited capacity of the human mind as fractals. We describe this as good. It has to be understandable. It has to make sense. It can't be a system that doesn't evolve, that was non-functional. It has to be a functional system. It has to be relational. We've already done a lot of the work to get there. I'm just introducing this new concept, and here I am going in a way that it's just I'm deciding to go this way. But I'm thinking that we think of that as good. Like, what is a good thing? Something. My cat is here. So
introducing chaos.
So that's what I would say, though. Introducing chaos, and he has a different point of view on that.
Well,
sense,
I think
that's a pretty good. I think that's a pretty good, like a sciencey.
I have a question about relationality. Let's see. Humans are the only thing with the mental capacity to be conscious of the above. Animals don't have existential crises. And
right.
humans do.
And animals don't have to define what's good and bad. I mean, they know. I mean, they just know everything that they do is good. They don't have any sense of going the wrong way. And maybe because they can. Well, let's not go there. But yeah. So I think all the things that we've just been talking about. I'm saying humans are we're the only people that are. We are the only things that are. Thinking about this stuff this way, right? That we're sort of trying to figure out what's going on here, and animals would just live it, right? And and maybe that's sort of the ideal practices are practices where we just live it and we don't contemplate it. But we're going to contemplate it. I mean, if we weren't designed to contemplate it, then we wouldn't be able to understand it at all, right? We wouldn't have the ability to understand it. So that sounded like a lot of words that didn't really go very far, very fast. But so this is just something, so the process for our universe evolving a functionally relational, rational system, which can be understood by our limited capacity, as this fractal idea, we describe as being good. So I'm just saying that if you think about when things happen that are good, what are the good? They're this.
I want to push it to a step, which I think is where some voices in the space, especially when I was at Old Symbolic World, that they were honing in on something like sacrifice being underneath that. And maybe.
Yeah. Well, you are. Yeah. No, I think the sacrifice is that your realization that your system is relational and that you have to think about it as maximizing the relational system and not maximizing an individuality. So as soon as you're thinking that way, you'll have a different point. You can you're sacrificing your own individuality to the relational system. It seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? I mean, that if the universe is relational in the way that we're saying, then why wouldn't it be that if you tried to do things with a relationship in mind and for the good or for the for the understandability of that relationship, why would you do anything else? Anything else would just be random. Would just be, well, I want to do this and I'm going to do it, and then that'll be good. Well, probably be better to figure out the relational system you're in and try to maximize the good within it, or try to not go against the relationality of it. Does that sound like maybe what they were saying?
Yeah, I think so.
You have to sacrifice your own. Well, we're getting there. You have to sacrifice your own. You can't think. Well, we're getting there. I mean, I don't know that we're gonna. Let's go real quick.
Yep.
Can we do that?
Yeah.
Let's go real quick. So the process of the universe evolving, we describe as being good. Humans are the only beings with the capacity to be conscious of the above. Having such a capacity implies a high degree of cognitive function, which requires a high degree of complexity and functional relationality. And what I'm saying I'm saying the ability for us to do this sort of looks like we're a little microcosm of the universe. We're doing sort of universe things, but we're doing it in this created sense. But we're imitating the universe, and that would make sense because what we see as fractal states appear to be true. So we're somehow aligned, like we are aligned with the state of the universe. We're sort of a microcosm of that thing. So humans are the only beings with the capacity to be conscious of the above. Having such a capacity implies a high degree of cognitive function, which requires a high degree of complexity and functional relationality. So we know this functional relationality. We can go against it, but we probably shouldn't, which is maybe what the symbolic world is getting at, is that no, functional relationality is that's probably what we want to go towards. This, and that we're a microcosm. And that, and then I have this, like, maybe we're definable as a fractal state of the universe. That the way that this makes so much sense to us is because we're the individual fractal state, but that's embedded in the relationality of all these others.
Well, Stephen, speaking of, I think that I'm enjoying the relationality that we're developing through some of these conversations and finding meaning and purpose as we flow through the time of of the YouTube episodic algorithmic experience that we're kind of that has some kind of tell-off.
Yeah, and it's great because you're maximizing the relationality, right? You're not trying to throw out anything. If you think about it in the way that we're talking about it, you can't possibly look at another person that's trying to convey an idea to you, and even though you don't agree to their idea, there's no way you can't discount the being of that person, right? You're embedded in a relationship with that person. You're so tightly aligned that you're going to find the one little way that you are not aligned and run with that. No, probably better to run with the relationalities. So that
and that is I think that you pointed at that being kind of an ethos in this space that we're playing around in, and that when you do that, something like forsaking the relational for something like truth only or first or non-relational propositional first, that is the kind of tyranny that we're trying to maybe push back against in this space. But man, dude, thanks for coming on and prompting me to walk through this. I think it's going to be engaging for people in the conversation, and I was excited to have the conversation today.
Great. Well, thanks for having me.
All right, man. Stick around. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in and staying with us until the end of today's episode. Your support and digital connection are truly meaningful to me. If you've enjoyed today's conversation and believe that these discussions bring real value to your life, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. I'd also love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below and let's keep the conversation going. Your feedback and interaction are crucial in making this space even more meaningful. Also, I've opened up channel memberships on YouTube. By joining, we can foster a stronger community of connection and support the continuation of more conversation craft. Membership is set up to foster this in 3 ways. Level 1, connect via members-only community posts for channel feedback, behind-the-scenes moments, and supportive membership branding on comments. In addition, level 2, get to watch podcasts a week before they air, along with other unique members-only videos. At level 3, join scheduled monthly focused small group discussions with other kindred spirits from all over the world. Thank you again for being a part of this journey. Together, we can cultivate meaningful, supportive digital community right here in this little corner of the internet. We'll see you next time.